So to begin the tour, we're going to do the agricultural segment, and we welcome you to the lower level of the museum here where the agricultural display is. The purpose of the museum is to show folks what life was like for our early ancestors and exhibit examples of the tools, implements, and other goods that they used to assist them in their survival. We hope that people visiting the museum or viewing this virtual tour will gain a better understanding of their heritage and appreciation for the hardships faced by their ancestors and how hard labor and determination helped to lay the foundation for our lives today. This section deals with the part agriculture played in our ancestors' life. We hope the brief highlight of some of our exhibits will give you an appreciation for just how difficult life was for our ancestors as compared to life today. The first exhibit was a single-seater or single-holer and built to accommodate one person. Larger outhouses were built to accommodate multiple family members, and holes varied in size, Mama Bear, Papa Bear, and Baby Bear here, to accommodate the various users. Odor control was always an issue, and many of the seats were equipped with lids. Of equal importance in all outhouses, regardless of size, was the small basket of corn cobs located near the seating area. There was no Charmin available in those days. But getting back to agriculture, it was a four-season activity. Spring through fall saw planting, growing, and harvesting of crops as the predominant activity. The fourth season, winter, was also an active time of year involving care of animals, maintenance of the buildings and equipment, and the harvest of timber that was necessary for their everyday needs. Late winter and early spring frequently involved producing maple syrup. If you compare the syrup-making activities of our ancestors with ours today, it is apparent how much harder they had to work than we do now. Our ancestors had to strap on their snowshoes and carry their wooden buckets, lids, and tools into the woods. They had to drill the holes of the trees with a hand drill and then drive the spiles in order to hang their buckets and lids. Later, when the buckets were full of sap, they would go back into the woods, putting on a shoulder yoke for which was suspended two gathering pails, and they would head out to the woods to collect the sap. These gathering pails, when full, weighed approximately 80 pounds, and they had to be carried back through the snow on the snowshoes to the collection point. They then had to be emptied into gathering tanks that were pulled by horses for the trip back to wherever the boiling of the actual syrup was done. Boiling required prior felling of trees and cutting of firewood. At the end of the season, they would once again return to the woods, collect their wooden buckets and lids, and remove the spiles and taps from the trees. These days, the trip to the woods is made only once, and they're not doing it on snowshoes, they're doing it in their snowmobiles or their four-wheel drive vehicles. They use an electric drill to bore the hole in the tree rather than doing it by hand, and the spiles are inserted. No longer are any wooden buckets or lids necessary, as they now use plastic tubing, and this plastic line carries the sap from the tree directly to the gathering tank. When that tank is full, you drive to it in your truck, you start a pump, and transfer the sap from the gathering tank to your truck for the trip back to the sap house, where it will be boiled into the maple syrup. At the end of the season, there are no wooden buckets or lids to bring in from the woods, and they do not even have to take down the plastic lines, rather leaving them in place to be used again next year. Now really, would you rather carry 80 pounds of full gathering pails through the snow on snowshoes, or would you rather have it automatically draining down into the tank through plastic tubing? Life today is certainly easier than it was for our ancestors. Later in the spring, you will have the pleasure of hooking your horses or oxen to a drag, also known as a stone boat. While the horse drags the stone boat around the field, you follow, picking up and removing rocks and boulders in order to be able to plow the ground. Once the rocks are removed, you hitch the same horses or oxen up to the plow and walk behind them around and around the field until it is all plowed. You're not done yet. Now you can walk around the field again and sow the seeds for your crops, one at a time with a handheld seeder. You can only imagine how many seeds it took to plant an entire cornfield. As you had done during the winter, you now do in the other seasons, and that being taking care of your livestock, including the dairy cows. If you were lucky enough to own any of the cows, You had to engage in the daily activity of milking them and handling the milk. The museum offers a wide variety of exhibits that were used in the care of these animals, ranging from such necessary items as the feeders, where the hay was placed in which the animals could eat from. And if you did own a cow, the museum has a number of items used in the handling of the milk, the pails, the funnels, and the cans that it was stored in. Milking for our ancestors was much more labor intensive than it is for us today, where now the cows are milked by automatic machines, the milk travels through piping to bulk refrigerated tanks, and the farmer has very little manual handling to do. Our ancestors also had to do their own milk testing to determine the butter fat content, etc. And this glass device is a lactometer. Summer involved extensive labor in the cutting and bringing in of hay. This meant cutting the fields with a handheld scythe. The cut hay then had to be pulled into windrows with a bull rake or hay rake, and then after that was completed, you got to return to the field again with your hay wagon and using a pitchfork pick up the hay from the field, placing it in the hay wagon for the trip back to the barn. Once back at the barn, you had to pitch it from the wagon into the loft. But such was the farming life of our ancestors. Today, the farmer sits on his tractor, pulling a baling machine that leaves neatly wrapped bales of hay behind. Fall did not offer any particular let-up in activity. Grains and other crops had to be harvested, again, all done by hand. Grain, for instance, had to be cut by hand with a cradle scythe and bundled into sheaves for the return to the barn. After allowing time for it to dry, it was spread out on the barn floor and beaten with flailing sticks to remove the grain from the shaft. The resulting grain then had to be further cleaned and passed through a fanning mill where hulls of small stones and other impurities were removed. Once all that was done, it was again time to hitch up the horses and take the grain to the local grist mill to be ground. Corn also had to be cut by hand using this cornstalk cutter. The ears were then shucked and dried before having the kernels removed in the corn shellers. Unless we forget the remaining corn cobs, you recall the small basket in the outhouse. Francestown was known for its large number of apple orchards, and many of the apple barns still stand. The museum has several items used in the harvest, including this apple picking pole basket. Apples were picked from the tree one at a time and placed in this chest carrying case. Once that was full, you returned to the barn and placed the apples in the wooden crates for storage or transport later in the year. That completes our overview of the seasonal demands of the agriculture section over the course of a year. All the work had to be done by hand, and failure to successfully complete these chores literally meant no food for the family that winter. But you not only had to feed your family, you also had to generate enough extra food to get income for other necessities of life that you could not produce yourself. So while many people wish for the good old days, those days might lose some of their luster if you actually had to live in them. This segment of our virtual tour has dealt with the agricultural aspects of our heritage and shown you a few of the over 100 exhibits we have in the agricultural section of the museum. We invite you to review the remaining 4 virtual tour segments that deal with commerce of the time, domestic life, firefighting, and transportation. Thank you for watching this segment of the virtual tour of the Francestown Heritage Museum, and we look forward to having you visit us in the coming year.